Hi everyone, it's Miss Draeger. I am recording my narrative for the narrative nonfiction writing, and I am going to tell you the story of how I saved a 2-year-old. I was about 24, 25 years old, and I was living in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, in a duplex. It had an upper and a lower apartment. And it was at night during the summer. I wasn't teaching then, but I was waitressing at night. And I was getting ready for work, actually. And it was just me and my roommate. Her cat was there with me, and I always played fetch with the cat. It thought it was a dog. Getting ready for work, and all of a sudden I hear this scream like I've never heard before. And it wasn't too loud. It was outside, I could tell. So I rushed to my living room window. And, you can only get so close to a window. And I looked up and down the street, and I didn't see anything. There was no cars, no people out on the sidewalks. It was about mid-afternoon on a random weekday. I can't even remember the day. So I sat by the window and I listened and I looked and I didn't hear anything. And I went back to get ready for work, and I heard it again. And this time it was louder and it didn't sound right. It was just kind of a scream where somebody's really scared. It's, kind of, ah! Kind of like that. And so then I rushed to the kitchen and I looked out my window and I saw a woman pacing outside her car. It was a huge, long 4-door car, a really old looking one, like an old police car, but it wasn't a police car. I remember it was blue, and I remember her pacing, and she was a larger woman. She was older, and I watched her for a second, and she kind of put her hands on her knees and bent over, almost like she was going to be sick or like she was going to pass out. And she shrilled again. She screamed again. But this time it was more of a, "Help me!" And I ran to my door. I grabbed my phone. Yes, I did have a cell phone back then. It was one of those old Razor flip phones. And I ran out into the street, ran across the street, got to her car, kind of stood in front of her and put my hands up and said, "What's wrong? What do you need? What's going on?" And she didn't keep saying, but she said, my grandson. And where is he?" And she pointed to the back window. And I tried to open the car door, but it was locked. And I said, and I peeked in the window. It was dark, and a little boy was in a car seat, and I remember seeing the car seat strap on him, but his head was hanging down. And without even asking, I opened the front door, the driver's side. I reached around, I pulled up the lock, because back then cars had locks where you push them down and pull them up. And I pulled up the lock, opened his door, and immediately started unbuckling him. Luckily, I had a niece at the time who was young, and I knew how to maneuver car seats. And I unbuckled him. And if you've ever picked up a small child or a small baby, there isn't resistance. Their body falls into you because they want to be picked up. I remember this child being so heavy, and I tried to lift him up 3 different times, and I couldn't because he wasn't responding to me. And I lifted him up, and finally got him to my chest and pulled him out of the car. When I turned toward the woman, she was pacing. I don't even think she could see me. She was almost like in a hysterical state, because she was panicking, and she was pacing, and she was grabbing her heart saying, "Oh, my grandson, my grandbaby." I just remember her repeating that over and over and over, and she was kind of like lost in a trance and going and going, and next thing I know, I looked at her, and I went to the back of the car, and I lied him on top of the back of the car, and he wasn't moving, he wasn't crying, his eyes were closed, but his lips, oh, they were blue. I remember them being blue. And not even saying in my head, well, you know, what the steps to CPR was. I just immediately started doing it. It was like a natural reaction, a habit, where I put my fingers under his chin and I tilted back his head, and I watched to see if his chest was going up and down. I put my ear toward his mouth, and I remember I remember putting my ears and feeling his little lips on my ear, and I stood there for a moment, and I couldn't feel any breath. I didn't see any breath. My gosh, it just happened so fast. And I know the rules of CPR have changed over the years, but I remember the first thing I did was I pinched his little nose, and I breathed in his mouth, a real quick breath. And as I did that, I looked up, and I looked at his little chest, and I found the space under, not the sternum, but the breastbone, the chest bone, and I pushed 3 times, because I remember in my training to push 3 times, and I counted 1, 2, 3, not out loud, but in my head. And I waited, and I did another breath, and I could not see his chest going up and down. Even with my breath going in his lungs, you normally see the chest, you know, rise a little bit, and I think I put my hands on his chest and pushed down 3 times. It just, like I said, it all happened so fast. And at this time, I remember when, his little body was lying across the back of the car. The woman now is on the floor, you know, saying a prayer, not a specific one, but Lord, help my child, Lord, help me, help my grandbaby, things like that. With his chest not going up and down, even with my breath going into his, I picked him up, and I held him close to my chest, and I just remember kind of having to lift him a few times, because he was like a rag doll. He was limp, and he was lifeless and nothing, and I took my fist, and I put it right under where the ribs meet, and I held him against my chest, so he's facing out, and I can feel his back toward me, but his head is slumped kind of down my shoulder. And I just remember taking him and squeezing him into my own body, just huge squeeze. And I got scared because I thought I was gonna break him. He was so little. And just instinctively, I did it again. And nothing, and then I did it one more time, and then all of a sudden I saw this little blue ball, fly out in front of us. And I kid you not, and I don't want to make joke of my story, but it did sound like a pop. And when I saw it fly out, I didn't squeeze him anymore. Back then it was, well, it still is called the Heimlich maneuver. I turned him around to face me, so I could put him back on the car. And as soon as I turned him around, his eyes were open, and he just let out this cry. The cry. Have you ever heard a baby cry when they quickly get hurt or they're scared? He let out this cry like he didn't know what was happening to him. And I remember looking at his face, and he let out this cry, and it was so different from the face that I saw before. The blue lips and the eyes closed and the lifeless slump. Now his eyes were open, and big tears were coming down. And his mouth is wide open and he's kind of screaming and doing a type thing. And I just remember giving him a big hug and crying myself, kind of a panic cry myself, like, oh, thank God, thank God. And by then, his grandmother stood up and she raised her hands up and she said, thank you, Lord. And I started to hand him toward her, and his little arms reached out for her, and he's crying and she's crying and she's holding him. And she's swaying him back and forth and praying and being thankful, and he's crying. We're all crying. Unbeknownst to me, the neighbor, I didn't know that there were other people coming out of their houses at the time. Somebody did call 911, and you could hear the sirens coming. And as I'm watching the grandmother hold her grandson, I see more people standing out on the sidewalk. Nobody approached us. It was only a couple. I remember somebody across the street. I remember the neighbor behind me. He's the one that came out and said 911. I called 911. And the ambulance pulls up and loud and piercing. And I've never been close to an ambulance before. So I start waving my arms and directing them toward the car. And they pull up, and the two paramedics get out of the car. I can't remember if they were men, women. I have no idea. And the one goes over toward the woman and directs her inside the ambulance. And I talk to the other paramedic, and I basically explain the whole story that I just told you now. She said, thank goodness you were around. Thank goodness you came out of your house. She said, basically, we'll take it from here. And the grandmother and the boy were already in the ambulance. She shut the doors with one paramedic inside. I believe she was a she now. I remember talking to a she. And she got in, and they drove away. The car was left there. I stood and I talked to the neighbor who came out, who called 911. I didn't know him. He was an older man. And we kind of just looked at each other and said, wow, I can't believe that just happened. He made a comment too. Thank God you came out. He's like, I was sleeping, and when I woke up, I came out and I saw you there, and I ran and got my phone. And I stood there for a moment, and the ambulance was already gone. I said thank you to the neighbor for calling, and we were questioning, well, what happens next? What's going to happen? Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll call us. Maybe they'll knock on our doors. I don't know. And I went back up into my apartment. I was kind of shooken up. That was a huge adrenaline rush. And I remember my roommate's cat coming up to me, and I picked it up and I pet it. And I kind of calmed myself down, and I wasn't, like crying or crazy or anything, but I just had to, be normal and breathe and say, okay, I gotta go to work. So I grabbed my apron and my car keys, and I walked out to my car, and I looked at the woman's car, the big blue car that I saw initially, and I just said a little prayer, and I went to work, and I waitressed all night, and when I came home, the car was gone, and that was it. And it's a story, or a story. It's an experience that I will never forget. Every decision I made in this story was complete instinct in trying to help this child. Not that I don't think anybody's prepared for a choking child or for anybody who doesn't breathe. You're not prepared for it. You kind of go in and do the thing. Do I feel like I'm more of a prepared mom or auntie or sister just because I helped this 2-year-old out? No. Who knows if I'll do it different next time or when the situation arises. I don't know. But I think it's important that we all learn the basic steps to CPR and the Heimlich maneuver. Even other ways, just read about it. Not that you need to go out and practice it, but read about certain situations and know what to do when those situations arrive. So at least we have the background knowledge. We recognize it. We've read about it. But as I tell you my story, it all comes back to me, the visuals and the feelings and even the adrenaline. I'm sorry if I got loud and crazy there for a little bit. But yes, it is definitely an experience that I will never forget. And I thank you very much for listening to my story. And I hopefully motivated you to go out and learn something new. Thank you.